I'm Naomi Clark, 36, only daughter and caregiver in every way that counts. The woman at the front desk didn't even glance at me. Her thin fingers moved precisely over the logbook, flicking pages like my name had never existed. A fake orchid wilted in a dusty vase beside her elbow. Classical music crackled faintly from the ceiling speaker above us, trying to soften what was really a cold, clinical entryway lined with pastel chairs and pamphlets about memory loss. I shifted my weight. "I'm just here to drop off Mom's quilt," I said, carefully lifting the cloth-wrapped bundle I'd sewn from old family shirts. Her favorite lavender ones were stitched along the edges. "Can you just let her know I'm here?" The receptionist looked up, finally, and clicked her tongue. "Sorry. You're not on the visitor list anymore. There's a note here." She pointed to a highlighted section on the screen, not turning it to show me. "Your access was revoked last week by the family contact on file." Family contact. My voice cracked. "I am the family." She tilted her head, mildly apologetic. "That would be Ms. Marjorie Clark, your aunt." My stomach twisted. Of course it was Aunt Marge. She'd always had a way of cutting me out with the kind of elegance that made it seem like paperwork and concern. "You're free to leave the quilt? We'll pass it along." "No," I said, folding it tighter against my chest. "No, thank you." Behind me, the automatic door opened and closed, hissing like a sigh. I didn't move. "Is there a supervisor I can speak with?" I asked, quieter now. "Or someone on staff who knows me. I've been coming here every weekend." There's nothing I can do." She cut in, her tone soft, but final. "You'll have to resolve this with the family contact directly. Resolve this. Like it was a traffic ticket. Like it wasn't my mother on the other side of the locked doors. Probably sitting in her wheelchair, blinking at the window, waiting for me." I stood in silence, letting the moment stretch. No one in the waiting area looked up. A man coughed. A nurse passed with a clipboard, not meeting my eyes. If you've ever been through something like this where the person you love is right behind a door you're not allowed to touch, drop a comment or let me know where you're watching from. Hit like or subscribe if family drama ever made you feel invisible too. "Excuse me, miss." The voice came from behind me, slow, deliberate. I turned. A man in a charcoal gray suit stood by the entrance, his hands clasped. His ID badge read, "Director, Wesley Ridge." I recognized him, vaguely. He'd only been introduced once, months ago, during a holiday event. "I believe we need to speak," he said, privately. He nodded at the receptionist, who suddenly straightened in her seat. "She may come with me," he said. "Right now." She blinked. "But the file." He cut her off. "I'll update the file myself. Miss Clark, follow me." The front lobby froze. Someone looked up from their phone. The air changed like a window had opened. I followed him down the hallway, my mother's quilt still pressed against my chest. I didn't understand what was happening yet, but everyone else in the room had gone silent. They had no idea. And they were about to find out. The hallway smelled like lemon cleaner and chamomile lotion, a mixture that would have been comforting if not for the knot in my throat. The director's shoes echoed in measured beats as he led me past the rec room, past the framed watercolors painted by residents, past the walls I knew like the back of my hand. "I want to be clear," he said, slowing his stride just enough to match mine. "I'm not in the business of overriding family dynamics, but when a resident puts something in writing, it becomes my responsibility to act on it." I looked at him, confused. What did she put in writing? He stopped at his office door and opened it without answering. I stepped inside. The room smelled like aged books and something sweet peppermints maybe. On the wall behind his desk hung a photo of the facility's ribbon-cutting ceremony. My mother had been there for that. She used to volunteer here, years ago, before the diagnosis. He gestured to the seat across from his desk and closed the door. Then he unlocked a drawer, pulled out a manila folder, and laid it flat. My name was written on the tab in bold, black ink. Your mother submitted a request to amend her next of kin and emergency contact forms, he said, sliding a copy toward me. 2 weeks ago. I blinked. She what? She requested that you be listed as her sole contact. No other family. No proxies. She signed it with full cognitive awareness. We had a notary, 2 nurses, and a social worker present. I touched the page. Her shaky signature curled across the bottom like a defiant thread of ink. I don't understand, I whispered. Then why was I banned from visiting? He looked at me gently. Because the system hadn't caught up with her yet. And someone else, your aunt, submitted a block in the meantime, which, until now, we had no reason to challenge. He reached for another form, and then this arrived. It was a letter, written in my mother's handwriting, the kind that looped and dipped like she was still penning birthday cards in the 90s. To whom it may concern, it read, "If my daughter Naomi Clark is ever turned away, it is a mistake. She is the only person I trust to speak for me when I cannot. I do not want to be in this place if she is not allowed beside me." There was a smudge of blue ink where her hand had trembled. My eyes burned. She submitted it independently, he said softly. And yesterday, she followed through. What does that mean? I asked, the air thickening. It means, he said, folding his hands. Your mother initiated her discharge. In your name. She used her power of agency while she still had it, and she insisted that all further arrangements be coordinated directly with you. I froze. She left, I said. She's gone. She left this morning, he said, accompanied by 2 nurses and a transport service. She said, and I quote, "My daughter will know what to do next." I sat back in the chair, the quilt still bundled in my lap. For a moment, I felt everything and nothing. The panic of being too late, the wonder that she remembered how, the weight of being chosen again by someone who the world kept treating like a name on a clipboard. She walked out of here, I asked, voice thin. He smiled just slightly. Rolled? Technically. But yes. I closed my eyes. The relief came like a wave, cold, bracing, almost painful in how suddenly it washed over the numbness. She's at your address now, he added. We sent a home nurse with her for the first night. She insisted on using the apartment above your bookstore. Correct. Yes, I said, still stunned. I'd been fixing it up. Just in case. I didn't think. Well, he said, standing. She did. I rose slowly. So I can go. You should go, he said, and Ms. Clark. I paused at the door. She's not just sharp. She's strategic. Whatever else is going on with your family, your mother made her choice clear. I nodded. The hallway stretched before me again. But this time it felt different. Less like a passage to nowhere, and more like a tunnel I was finally walking out of. I left the building without looking back. The taxi smelled like cinnamon gum and mildew. I barely noticed the traffic. Barely noticed the driver asking if I needed help with the quilt when I clutched it like it might vanish if I let go. The apartment above the bookstore was built into a converted attic. Sloped ceilings, creaky floors, exposed beams. I'd been preparing it for months, repainting the windowsills, adding insulation, checking for leaks. I'd pictured her there, but only in the way you picture something out of hope, not certainty. When I opened the door, the first thing I saw was her chair, my mother's burgundy velvet wingback from her old reading nook perched near the window. A home nurse sat quietly in the corner, reading a book, and in the middle of the room, under a blanket that wasn't yet unfolded, My mother turned toward me. "Naomi," she said. Her voice paper thin. I dropped the quilt and crossed the room. Her hand reached for mine, warm and familiar and trembling. "I told them," she whispered, eyes shining. "I told them you'd come. I never stopped," I said, kneeling beside her. "They just locked the wrong doors." The nurse stood and excused herself. I heard the click of the door as she gave us space. Outside, the street lamp flickered to life. I looked around the apartment. The walls still needed art. The bookshelves still needed dusting. But my mother was here. She had found her way home through forms and signatures, and the force of will no one thought she still had. I reached for the quilt. "It's made of us," I said. "The shirts you wore on all our big days. The ones you said felt lucky." She smiled. "Then we're lucky now," she said. And for the first time in months, I let the silence settle without fear. Because in this small room, above a bookstore, the woman everyone tried to silence had just rewritten her ending. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, not because of any alarm, but because of the way silence has its own volume when you're suddenly responsible for someone again. The old radiator groaned to life behind the bookshelf. Pipes ticked in the walls like a heartbeat. Above me, the ceiling fan turned with a slow creak that matched the rhythm of my breath. I lay still for a moment, just listening, before I swung my legs over the side of the bed. She was still here. I padded across the creaky floor and cracked open the door to her room. The soft morning light was filtering through the window, illuminating the white strands of her hair like silver threads. She slept with one arm curled under her cheek, lips slightly parted, peaceful. On the bedside table, the lavender alarm clock she used to keep in our old kitchen blinked its green digits 5:43. Next to it, the water glass I'd set out last night was untouched, the lip of it fogged with condensation. I closed the door gently and moved to the kitchen. Boiling water, mug. The sound of the kettle felt like a ritual one I hadn't performed since she moved into the nursing home 2 years ago. Back then, they said it was safer, that she'd be surrounded by professionals, that it wasn't giving up. It was doing the right thing. They never said how hard it would be to hand over her favorite mug and toothbrush and pretend that this was love, packaged and supervised. I stirred the tea slowly, watching the herbs swirl, and thought about how easy it had been for them to erase me from her life. It started with subtle things. She needs quiet now. Naomi. Marjorie's handling the paperwork. We have to keep her environment stable. And I believed them. Or maybe I just didn't know how to fight without looking like I was trying to take control. But when Aunt Marge showed up with her cold pearls and colder smile, things began to shift. She hadn't visited Mom in 5 years before the diagnosis. Suddenly, she was showing up to oversee everything, reintroducing herself to nurses like a CEO visiting her old factory floor. And somehow, somewhere along the way, she became the official contact. I was too tired to challenge it. I kept showing up. I kept bringing her things. I kept reminding the staff of my name. But last week, I had knocked on the glass of the recreation room and seen Mom in a chair, facing the wall. No TV, no music, just silence. When she turned and saw me, her face lit up until the nurse closed the blinds. That's when I knew. That wasn't safety. That was erasure. Now, standing in my kitchen, in the small apartment above my bookstore, the scent of peppermint tea and worn pages in the air, I realized just how far she had gone to come back to me. A sound behind me made me turn. She was in the doorway, dressed in her lavender cardigan. "Did I wake you?" I asked. She shook her head. "I couldn't sleep. Thought I smelled peppermint." I smiled and poured her a mug, careful to set it on a saucer like she liked. She took it in both hands, inhaled deeply, then sat on the little armchair by the window. I sat across from her, on the ottoman. "Do Do you remember doing it? I asked gently. The paperwork, the discharge. She nodded. I remember thinking, if I don't do it now, I'll forget how. We sat in silence for a few moments. The street below came slowly to life, early commuters, the clink of a bike chain, a woman calling after a child. I thought I was losing you, I said. I thought I already had. You never lost me, she said, sipping the tea. They just tried to convince us we weren't still tethered. I reached for her hand, and she let me hold it. Her skin was thinner now, the bones more pronounced. But the warmth was still exactly the same. The first week with her back was quiet. A rhythm slowly took hold. Morning tea, light walks on the rooftop, reading poetry together in the late afternoons. She couldn't remember everything. Sometimes she asked about my dad, forgetting he'd passed. Sometimes she repeated stories twice in the same hour, but there were moments glorious, burning moments where her clarity came through like sunlight after a storm. On Thursday, she asked to visit the bookstore. I want to see what you made, she said. So I wheeled her downstairs. The bell on the door jingled as we entered, and the air inside smelled like cedar shelves and lemon oil. My assistant, Jonah, looked up from the register and blinked. Mrs. Clark. In the flesh. She smiled. Don't act so surprised. I used to shelve books better than you, young man. He laughed, stunned. I could see tears forming in his eyes. Everyone had thought she was gone. I led her to the back reading nook. She scanned the shelves like she was surveying an old garden. Where's the section with the bad romance novels I used to hide from you? She asked. Top shelf now? I grinned. Out of reach for your own protection. She chuckled. Coward. We stayed for over an hour. Customers trickled in and out, each one pausing when they saw her. Some had known her when she helped me open the shop. Others had only heard stories. Now she was a story again. A returned one. That night, as I was brushing her hair, she said something that made me pause. You know she's coming. Right. Who, your aunt? Marjorie. I stopped. Mid-stroke. I don't care. She'll make it about her. She said. She always does. I'm not letting her through that door. I said. But my mother just smiled a little. No need for war. Naomi. She already lost. I didn't sleep much that night. Her words echoed in my head. There was a strange calm to them, not bitter. Just certain. I didn't know then how right she was. Because 2 days later, she arrived. Aunt Marge, in pearls and a navy dress, clutching a leather folder like it was a weapon. She knocked twice, then waited. I stood on the other side of the door, heart pounding. I looked at my mother. She nodded. So I opened it, and there she was, still composed, still cold, still certain she was in the right. Naomi, she said. We need to talk. I stepped aside without a word. She walked in, scanned the apartment, and then froze when she saw my mother sitting in her chair, sipping peppermint tea, eyes bright and waiting. You look well, she said stiffly. I am well, my mother replied. Thanks to Naomi. Aunt Marge blinked. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was complete. The kind that settles like dust and stays. Aunt Marge didn't sit down. She stood just inside the doorway, arms folded over her chest, eyes darting around the apartment like she was measuring its worth. Her gaze landed on the tea mug in my mother's hand, then on the quilt draped across the back of the chair. This isn't appropriate, she said at last. My mother tilted her head. The tea. The situation. Ruth. I stepped forward. She's home. That's the situation. Marge turned toward me slowly. Naomi, you don't have the capacity to care for someone with her level of needs. This space isn't certified. There are risks, legal consequences. I've already been in contact with She Chose Me, I said flatly. She signed the papers herself. I have copies. She wasn't of sound mind. She was... I snapped. There were witnesses, staff, a notary. You can try to twist it, but the truth doesn't care. My mother raised a hand. Not to stop me, but to steady the air between us. Marjorie, she said gently, I didn't forget who you are. I simply remembered who Naomi is. Marge blinked, her lips parted like she might object, but no words came out. You were never cruel, Mom continued, but you were always careful, with reputation, with appearances, with distance. I needed presence. I was present, Marge said quickly. When no one else in the family would step in, I handled everything. Medical bills, transportation, insurance. Yes. Mom nodded. You did all the things that make a person look responsible. But Naomi came every week. She brought flowers. She read to me. She asked how I felt. I protected your dignity. No, Mom said. You protected the idea of dignity. Not mine. Yours. The words landed like a bell toll, clear, low, undeniable. Aunt Marge lowered her eyes. For the first time in years, she looked unsure. I didn't move. I didn't rush to soften anything. I just stood beside my mother. Both of us breathing in the truth. Marge reached into her leather folder and pulled out a document. This is a petition to reinstate facility care, she said. I had it drawn up before I knew she'd left. It's still valid. If I file it, there will be a review. I crossed my arms. And if you do, we'll have our own documentation and witnesses. You're not going to win this one by default. Her face tightened. This isn't a competition. You made it one, I said. The second you turned me into the enemy and locked a door between me and my own mother. A long silence followed. Finally, Mom broke it. You can stay for dinner if you'd like, she said. We're having soup. Naomi's made that roasted carrot one I used to love. Marge looked at her, stunned. After everything I just said, Mom shrugged. You're still my sister. I watched her fold the document and slide it back into her folder. She didn't say yes to dinner, but she didn't storm out either. She stayed. Not warmly, not comfortably, but she stayed. The next few days passed in a haze of adjustment. I set up a pill organizer and a whiteboard calendar. We arranged weekly nurse visits and reconfigured the bathroom for easier access. Each morning, she surprised me. With memory, with clarity, with stubbornness. One morning, I caught her trying to sweep the kitchen floor. You don't have to do that, I said. She held up the broom. Then what's the point of coming home? She made a fair point. Sometimes we fought. About toast. About cardigans. About which way the books should face on the shelf. But even the arguments felt like a return. One afternoon, I found her sitting at the small writing desk I'd placed near the window. She was scribbling something on old notepaper with a ballpoint pen. Making a list, I asked, trying to remember the names of all the people I wanted to forgive. She said, before it's too late. I sat down beside her. Anyone on that list I should worry about? She smiled. I crossed you off years ago. I laughed, even though I felt tears at the edge of it. We sat in silence for a while. The world outside moved without us. Buses sighed at stops. Birds chirped near the ledge. The bookstore below hummed through the floorboards. She tapped the paper with her pen. You know what's strange? What forgiveness gets easier when you realize most people weren't trying to hurt you. They just didn't know how to see you. I nodded. I've felt invisible most of my life. She looked at me with those sharp, aging eyes that somehow still saw everything. Not to me. By the end of the second week, word had gotten out. Customers at the bookstore asked about her. Neighbors left little gifts outside the door. A woman from the neighborhood association brought over fresh-baked bread. "You're becoming a legend," I told her. "About time," she replied. Then the letter came. Official letterhead. Postmarked 2 days earlier. It was from the nursing facility. I opened it slowly at the kitchen table. She watched me, sipping her tea. "Dear Ms. Clark," it read, "we are writing to inform you that, following internal review and the voluntary discharge of Ruth Clark, your visitation ban has been lifted and formally expunged from all records. We regret the administrative confusion and acknowledge the oversight. Please find enclosed a copy of the updated contact file." I laughed once, a short, stunned laugh. She raised an eyebrow. "Good news. You've been cleared," I said. "They're pretending it never happened." "Typical," she said. "Erase the mess instead of owning it." I slid the papers into a drawer. "Doesn't matter. You're not going back." "I know," she said, "but it's nice to win." Later that night, I found her standing at the bookshelf, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the spine. She wasn't reading, just being near them. "They're quiet friends," she said. "Books. They hold your pain without ever asking questions." I smiled. "I learned that from you." She turned to me. "You learn to hold people's pain," she said. "That's harder." I helped her back to her chair. We sat together as the city dimmed and the last light vanished from the sky. And in the hush of the moment, I realized something: she hadn't just come home. She had brought me home with her. The phone call came on a Wednesday morning, just after I'd finished grinding coffee beans for the day. I was still in my robe, barefoot on the hardwood, when the ringtone echoed through the apartment. Not the landline, my cell phone. And not a number I recognized. "Hello," I answered, pressing the phone between shoulder and cheek while wiping the counter. "Is this Naomi Clark?" The voice on the other end was clipped and official. "Yes." "Who's calling?" "This is Darlene Moore from Child and Family Services. I'm calling in regard to Ruth Clark." I stood still, a faint hum starting in my ears. "She's fine," the voice added quickly. "She's safe. This isn't an emergency." "Then what is it?" I asked, already bracing. "There's been an inquiry filed against your household anonymous, claiming unsafe conditions, lack of proper medical equipment, negligence." She paused. "We're required to follow up in person." I closed my eyes. Of course. Aunt Marge, the only person petty enough to weaponize concern. I cleared my throat. "When tomorrow at 10:00 a.m. It's a preliminary visit. Standard procedure. We just need to verify the environment and interview your mother." I thanked her, set the phone down, and leaned against the fridge. The cold steel hummed behind my spine, but my hands were burning. I'd been here before, in school, in jobs, even in this family. Every time I got close to something real, someone tried to suggest I didn't deserve it. Not this time. I walked into my mother's room. She was awake, propped up by pillows, tracing her fingers along the embroidery on the quilt. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, then shook my head. "We're getting a visit tomorrow," I said. "From Family Services. Someone reported us." She blinked, then slowly set her hand in her lap. "Do I need to pack?" she asked, softly. "No," I said immediately. "No one's taking you. I just need the place to look like what it already is. Safe, comfortable. Ours." She smiled faintly. "Then let's clean." We spent the rest of the day preparing, not out of fear, but out of stubbornness. Every room was swept, every drawer organized. I stocked the fridge with fresh produce, lined up medication neatly on the counter, and printed out the care schedule I'd created. We reviewed her daily activities, and I made sure the nurse documentation from her last 2 visits was easily accessible. By nightfall, the place glowed. "You're sure you want to stay up here for the visit?" I asked her. "I'm not hiding in the bedroom while they judge you," she replied. "I've done enough of that in my life." She sat tall in her chair, wearing her lavender sweater, her silver hair pinned neatly, a quiet readiness in her eyes. "I remember when you were 12, she said as I poured tea. "You made a speech at school about being invisible." I blinked. "You remember that I remember every word," she said. "You said, when people don't see you, you learn to see everything." I smiled. "That sounds dramatic." "You were dramatic," she laughed. "But you were right." The knock came at exactly 9:58 a.m. I opened the door to find a woman in her late 50s with tortoiseshell glasses and a clipboard. "Ms. Clark." "Yes." "Come in." She stepped inside and paused, as if surprised. Her eyes scanned the space, the clean windows, the organized shelves, the sun slanting through the curtains onto the wooden floor. "This is lovely," she said. My mother smiled from her chair. "We do our best." The woman introduced herself Darlene and began the walkthrough. She checked the bathroom rails, the medication logs, the fire extinguisher, even the placement of rugs. "I see you've taken fall risks seriously," she said. "I've researched more than I ever thought I would." I replied. Then came the interview. She sat down beside my mother and asked a series of questions, voice gentle but deliberate. "Do you feel safe here?" "Yes." "Are you ever left alone without access to assistance?" "No." "Do you have regular contact with medical professionals?" "Yes." Darlene hesitated a beat. "Do you know who filed the concern?" my mother asked, leaning in slightly. "No," she said. "We don't share that." "Well," my mother said, "I have a guess." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. After 40 minutes, Darlene closed her folder. "There are no issues here," she said. "No grounds for concern. I'll file a full report. But from my perspective, this is an excellent setup." I nodded, heart pounding. "I'm sorry you had to go through this," she added, softer now. "It happens more than you'd think, especially in cases where family disagrees." I walked her to the door, just before stepping out. She turned to look at me. "You're doing good work, Naomi." I nodded again. "Thank you." When the door closed, I turned to my mother. She was beaming. "Told you," she said, and for a second, I felt that same 12-year-old girl inside me finally visible. 2 days later, I received a card in the mail. No return address, just my name, written in familiar cursive. Inside was a short message. "You may have won this round, but she'll need more care than you can give. You'll see. M." I didn't show it to my mother. I didn't reply. I didn't even keep it. I fed it through the shredder and swept the scraps into the bin, and then I added a new page to our calendar: home health evaluation, monthly new wheelchair fitting, Wednesday, poetry night, Saturday. Because if this was a battle, we weren't playing defense anymore. We were building something. On Sunday morning, I found my mother in the bookstore downstairs. She'd made her way down before I woke, already settled behind the counter with her cup of tea and a small stack of books. "You're open." I laughed. She shrugged. "Somebody has to run the place." I smiled and leaned against the edge of the counter. A young couple walked in. Curious. Tourists, maybe. They browsed the fiction section, and I heard them whisper something about the lady in the chair. "Is she the owner?" one asked. "No," my mother called out. "But I'm the boss." We all laughed. That afternoon, I posted a photo on the store's social media. "Mom's back in charge. Come find us where the tea's warm and the shelves tell better stories than we ever could." The post went viral in our small town way. Likes, comments, messages from people we hadn't seen in years. One message, though, stopped me. From a nurse at her old facility. We all knew she wanted to leave. She just needed someone to open the door. And I realized maybe that's all I ever did. Opened a door no one else believed she could walk through. We started getting visitors. Not the kind who brought casseroles or apologies, but the curious ones, the quietly supportive, the cautiously distant, the ones who weren't sure how to fit into this version of the story. Some brought flowers, others brought guilt disguised as politeness, and a few, just a few, came with nothing but their presence. Those were the ones she noticed. One of them was my cousin Dylan. He hadn't spoken to me since the year my father died. Too much tension between our parents. Too many holiday silences. But there he was, standing at the bookstore door one morning with a paper bag and 2 cups of coffee. I didn't know what kind she liked, he said, glancing at the stairs leading to the apartment. But I remember she used to give me those lemon drops after church. She still does. I replied, but only to people she forgives. He looked at me, unsure if I was joking. Then she called down from the top of the stairs. Is that Dylan? His face softened. Hi, Aunt Ruth. She smiled. Took you long enough. That visit was the first of many. He came back every Sunday after that. Sometimes with muffins, sometimes just with stories from his job. And I saw something in her that I hadn't seen in years, an ease, a return of old rhythms. Family not as function, but as feeling. She began asking questions again about the news, about books, about people she hadn't seen in decades. I started keeping a notebook of all the names she mentioned, just in case. Some days, she remembered them with clarity. Other days, she confused timelines and places, but always, she knew me. She never called me by the wrong name, never forgot the sound of my voice. I clung to that like a secret lifeline. One evening, I found her at the window, watching the rain. A stack of letters sat unopened beside her, holiday cards mostly, and 2 formal-looking envelopes that I'd already guessed were from the facility or insurance. Do you want me to open them? I asked. She shook her head. Not yet. Let's pretend they're invitations to a better life. I sat on the floor beside her chair, listening to the soft patter of drops on the glass. I don't think I realized how lonely I was, she said, until I wasn't. I looked up at her. I knew. I whispered. I just didn't know how to say it without sounding like I was blaming you. She reached down, touched my hair. You didn't need to say it. You showed up. Every time. We sat in silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, but held. That night, I left the letters unopened. But time has a way of creeping in, even when things feel whole. Her energy began to fade in ways I couldn't ignore. She'd sleep through lunch, skip her puzzles, confuse the days. One afternoon, I found her trying to use her toothbrush as a pen. She looked at it, puzzled, and whispered, "This isn't working." I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I just took her hand and said, "Let's try again tomorrow." But inside, I knew what it meant. The forgetting was getting closer. That night, I called the home nurse and asked for an evaluation. I didn't want to admit it to myself, but I needed a second opinion. I needed to know how much longer I had before the pieces started falling apart again. The nurse, Layla, arrived the next morning with her usual soft voice and gentle eyes. She did her exam quietly, methodically, asking my mother to identify objects, recall dates, follow simple instructions. My mother was charming, as always. But the hesitation between answers had grown. After the exam, I followed Layla into the kitchen. She's plateaued in some areas, she said gently. But there are new signs of short-term memory disorientation. She's starting to lose the days. I swallowed hard. Is it time? Layla shook her head. Not yet. But soon. You'll need more help. Maybe a live-in nurse? Maybe a rotation? You're doing everything right. But even love has limits when it comes to care. I nodded, unable to speak. She'll let go gently. She added. She's not fighting it. That helps. But I was fighting every inch of it, and she knew. Later that night, she looked at me as I helped her into bed. You're holding on too tightly, she said. I don't want to forget, I whispered. Then remember it now, she said. All of it. The tea, the books, the door you opened. Remember it before it becomes a story you only half believe. I stayed with her until she fell asleep, her hand in mine. The room lit only by the soft flicker of the bedside lamp. And I started writing it down. Everything. Not because I was afraid to forget, but because I wanted to remember it clearly, on her terms. The next morning, she didn't wake up at her usual hour. I let her sleep. By noon, she stirred, smiled, and asked for lemon drops. I had a dream, she said, that I was walking through the bookstore, and the books were singing. What were they singing? I asked. She smiled. Your name. And for the rest of that day, I didn't worry. I didn't plan. I didn't think about insurance or nurses or end-of-life care. I just read to her. We sat together by the window, and I read her favorite poems out loud. She would close her eyes and whisper the last lines with me. Later that night, I carried her back to bed. Her body was light, her breath slow. She opened her eyes once more before sleep took her. Did I come home in time? She asked. You never left? I said. She nodded, satisfied. And that was the last full conversation we ever had. She didn't pass away that night, but something changed. She stopped responding to visitors, slept more than she woke, ate less, spoke only in fragments, and yet, she was peaceful. I stopped fighting it. I sat beside her, held her hand, and listened to the quiet in between the ticking clock and the traffic outside. Friends came and went. Aunt Marge never returned. Dylan visited every few days, sometimes just to sit on the floor and tell stories from his childhood. She used to braid my hair, he said once, laughing, even when I didn't ask. She did that to everyone. I replied, even the mailman once. We laughed, and for a moment, she opened her eyes and smiled. She heard us. She always did. 1 week later, she slipped into a deeper sleep, and 2 days after that, she was gone. It was early, just before sunrise. I held her hand as the light changed, and I felt her last breath, quiet, soft, like the final line of a poem she'd memorized long ago. I didn't cry. Not then. I just whispered, "Thank you for leaving the door open." And in the silence that followed, I swear I heard the book sing. The hours after she passed didn't feel real. The world didn't stop. Not like I thought it would. A delivery truck still rumbled past the window. A neighbor's dog barked twice. My phone buzzed with an auto-generated appointment reminder from a dentist I hadn't seen in 2 years. But the air inside the apartment had changed. Her absence filled the room louder than her presence ever did. I sat beside her bed long after the nurse arrived, after the call to the mortuary, after the whispered condolences. I waited, not knowing for what, some sign, maybe, or the feeling that it was truly over. But grief doesn't enter with ceremony. It just sits beside you like someone who's always been there. By evening, the sun dipped low behind the bookstore awning. I finally stood, brushed a hair from her pillow, and folded the quilt she loved. The one made of our shared history: lavender shirts, flannel patches, the green one she wore the day she first brought me to school. I wrapped it around my own shoulders, and then I went downstairs. The bookstore was closed. The sign flipped, but I unlocked the door anyway. I didn't turn on the lights, just walked through the aisles in the fading light, my fingers brushing spines like braille. When I reached the poetry section, I stopped. Her favorite book dog-eared, spine cracked, filled with sticky notes and scribbled hearts waited on the middle shelf. I took it down, opened it. A page fluttered loose, not a poem. A letter. In her handwriting. Naomi, if you're reading this, then I've left. Don't worry, I'm not far. I never will be. You and I lived more in that tiny apartment than some people live in a mansion full of guests. You gave me a soft landing. You gave me a way back to myself. This world is noisy, distracted, cruel in ways it doesn't even notice. But you noticed everything. That's your curse, I suppose, but also your gift. Don't close the door just because I'm not behind it anymore. Leave it open, for someone else, for yourself. Love. Mom. I sank to the floor, the letter in one hand, the book in the other, the weight of the world on my chest, and I cried. For everything we'd lost, everything we'd reclaimed, and everything that now belonged only to memory. The next morning, Dylan showed up without knocking. He let himself in, carrying a bag of bagels and 2 thermoses. He didn't ask anything, just handed me coffee and sat beside me on the floor behind the counter. You okay? He asked eventually. No, I said. He nodded. Good. I'd be worried if you were. We sat in silence, the kind that only exists between people who finally stop pretending they need to fill it. After a while, I said, I found a letter. From her, I handed it to him. He read it quietly, then folded it and gave it back. She really knew how to land a sentence. He said, she always said if she hadn't been a mother, she would have been a writer. She was both. He said, you're the proof. I blinked fast, swallowing the lump in my throat. She asked me to leave the door open. He looked around. You gonna reopen the upstairs apartment? I think so. For who I don't know. I said. But I'll know when they knock. The funeral was small. Just family and a few friends from the neighborhood. She had asked for no flowers, no speeches, no piano music, just poetry. So we took turns reading from her favorite book in the park behind the bookstore. The sun came through the trees like memory. Even Aunt Marge came. She stood near the back, dressed in navy again. She didn't speak, didn't draw attention, just stood still. Her hands folded, her eyes red. After the last poem, as people began to drift away, she approached. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. Good, I replied, because I'm not offering it yet. She nodded, but I did love her, in my own way. I believe you, I said, and she believed it too. Marge looked at the folded letter in my hand. She always liked to write. She always liked to say something. I corrected, even if no one listened. Then, unexpectedly, she reached into her purse and handed me something. It was an old photograph. My mother, holding me as a baby, standing in front of the original bookstore sign, before the repainting, before the remodeling, before everything. She gave me this the day she moved into the home. Marge said, told me to return it when I was ready to see clearly. I held the photo in both hands. I think she knew we'd come around. I said, she always knew more than she let on. Marge replied, and then walked away. In the weeks that followed, the apartment upstairs didn't stay empty, not in the literal sense. I didn't rent it. I didn't list it online, but I went up every night. I sat on the window seat. I kept the tea cupboard stocked. I watered the basil plant she used to talk to like it was a friend, and slowly, the space became something else. Not a room haunted by absence, but one filled with quiet purpose. I started a writing group there, just 4 women, all caregivers, all tired, all unsure if they were allowed to feel anything out loud. We met every Thursday. We read, we wrote, we cried. Sometimes we laughed too hard. Sometimes no one spoke for 20 minutes. And that was okay. One evening, a woman named Carla brought in a piece she had written about her mother's final days. She thought I couldn't handle it. She said, tears slipping down her cheek. But I did. I handled all of it. We all nodded. She wasn't looking for reassurance. She was looking for a witness. And we were that. I left the door open after every session, just in case someone else needed to walk through it. Months later, I found myself back at the facility, not as a daughter this time, but as a volunteer. It was strange. The halls looked smaller, the pastel paint more faded than I remembered. But the people, they were the same. People waiting, watching, forgetting, remembering. I started a small poetry circle there. The first week, only 2 people showed up. An old man named Leonard and a woman named Grace. Leonard didn't speak. Grace fell asleep halfway through the first poem. But I kept coming back. Eventually, we grew to 6, then 9. One day, the activities coordinator pulled me aside and said, "Whatever you're doing, it's working. They talk about you when you're gone." I smiled. "I'm not doing much." I said, "I'm just reading." But that wasn't true. I was listening, the way she did, and that was everything. The bookstore still runs. The upstairs apartment is still quiet some nights, and some mornings. I catch myself looking up at the ceiling, expecting to hear her chair roll across the floor. I don't cry as much anymore, but I still keep the quilt by the window, still make peppermint tea, still read her favorite poem every Sunday, and I still leave the door open, just in case. The first holiday without her came quicker than I expected. Thanksgiving. She used to hum in the kitchen while peeling sweet potatoes, insisting they didn't taste right unless boiled in salted water and mashed with a wooden spoon like the old days. She wore an apron that said, "Queen of the Quiet House," a joke she never explained, and kept a bottle of cinnamon whiskey in the cupboard for emergencies only. That morning, I woke to the sound of wind against the bookstore windows. I padded barefoot upstairs, halfway expecting her to already be up, complaining about the cold draft near the stairwell. But the apartment was still. No complaints, no humming, no cinnamon, just silence. I stood by the counter for a long time, hands wrapped around a mug of cooling tea, staring at the folded quilt draped over her favorite chair. For a moment, the weight of everything pressed against my ribs. Grief, memory, the strange guilt of being alive when she wasn't. But I didn't let it break me. Instead, I reached for the old apron still hanging behind the kitchen door. I tied it around my waist. Too big, too faded, but hers. Then I did the only thing that made sense. I started cooking. Not for guests, not for show, but to keep the rhythm alive. I peeled potatoes by hand, lit a candle by the window, turned on her playlist from that clunky old Bluetooth speaker she once called the robot box, and when the scent of nutmeg and sage began to fill the room, I opened the window slightly, just enough to let the smell drift down to the street, just enough to remind the world someone lived here, someone remembered. By noon, the knock came, not planned, not expected. It was Carla, from the writing group, holding a foil-wrapped dish and looking sheepish. "I was going to eat in my car," she said, laughing softly. Then I smelled something, and I figured. I opened the door wider. "Come in. 15 minutes later, Dylan arrived with a grocery bag full of rolls and a bottle of wine. Then Layla, the nurse, showed up with her teenage daughter and a tray of candied carrots. Even Jonah, my assistant from the bookstore, slipped in with a pumpkin pie from the bakery down the street. We squeezed around the tiny table, mismatched chairs, old plates, too much food. No formal prayer, just clinking glasses and shared stories. At one point, I looked around and realized every single person at that table had met my mother. In some way, briefly or deeply. But all of them had been touched by her life, her words, her fierce quietness. And somehow, without planning it, we had made space for her. I reached under the table, touched the folded letter in my pocket, and smiled. She would have rolled her eyes at the sentimental music, but she would have stayed. She always stayed. After dessert, as people began to gather their coats and say goodbye, I walked Jonah to the door. You know, he said, I always wondered what it meant when she called herself the Queen of the Quiet House. I laughed. I asked her once. She said, it means I know when to speak and when to make silence feel like company. He nodded. That's exactly how it felt when she was around, when the door closed. I stood there a moment longer, watching the fog gather at the edges of the windows. And then I went back upstairs. I lit one more candle and placed it by her photograph. Not a shrine, just a reminder that she had lived, that she had left something behind. The weeks passed. Winter came. The bookstore slowed. The upstairs remained quiet, but the writing group continued. Carla finished her memoir. Dylan wrote a short story based on childhood visits to the beach. One woman, Angela, started keeping a journal for the first time in years. They called it the Lavender Room. Not officially, but enough that we all started using the name. Someone printed a small wooden plaque and hung it by the apartment door. The Lavender Room. All voices, welcome. We didn't ask who did it. We just nodded. One day, I found a voicemail on the bookstore phone. It was from the nursing facility. Ms. Clark, we're calling to inform you that your mother's room has been formally released. We found a few personal items during final cleaning and would like to return them. Please let us know if you'd prefer pickup or mail. I stared at the receiver, her room, her old room. I didn't want anything from that place. Not a comb, not a book, not a final trace of who she was under fluorescent lights and plastic curtains. But something inside me told me to go. I visited the next morning. The woman at the desk was different now. Younger, softer. She handed me a cardboard box with my name written in black marker across the top. Take your time, she said. There's a bench near the garden if you'd rather open it there. I walked outside, sat in the same spot where my mother and I had once fed birds together. I lifted the lid. Inside, a framed photo of me, age 10, grinning with a missing tooth. Her paperback copy of the poetry book we used to read. A single earring from a pair I thought she lost years ago. A notepad with one page written on it in shaky script. It read, if this is ever returned, give it to Naomi. Let her decide what matters. No instructions. No sentimentality. Just trust. I tucked the page inside my coat, took the box, and left. Back at the bookstore, I placed the photograph on the shelf behind the counter. Not to display, just to feel less alone on slow days. The poetry book I placed in the lavender room, open on the table, a bookmark resting at the last poem she ever heard. The notepad I left untouched. Blank pages waiting, not to be filled out of obligation, but out of choice. Her final lesson. Let her decide what matters. Now, I wake up early, not because I have to, but because I like to. I sit at the window with tea, open a notebook, and write small things. A dream I remember. A name that appeared in my sleep. The way the wind sounds different before it rains. I don't write with pressure. I write with presence. Her presence. Every so often, I hear the bell of the bookstore door, and I still glance up, half expecting to see her wheeling in with a scarf too large and a smirk too quiet. But the person who walks in is always someone else. And that's okay. Because she's already here. In the stories, in the pauses, in the silence that holds no fear anymore. I keep the quilt by the window. I keep the kettle full. I keep the door open. Always open. For her. For whoever needs it next. For myself.